So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the OCI directory. In your home directory, there is a hidden directory called .oci. And you see I've got a couple keys here. In the document that I shared with you that we went over earlier on this doc link here for setting up the API key, Oracle has two different documents. One of them is horribly long and they won't take it down, and I don't know why. This is the correct document. That's why I've provided that to you, where you'll install the CLI, and then you will run OCI setup config, and you can opt to use their wrapper to create a PEM key. Of course, you don't need to use their tool. You can use SSH keygen with the right options and create a PEM key right there on the fly. Doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as you have a key. Now you don't need to run OCI setup config, which would do all this for you. And I like to know how the nuts and bolts work, because when the wrappers break, if you know what it's doing under the hoods and the wrapper is broken, you can still work through whatever it is that you have to, versus waiting for someone to fix the wrapper. So here you could see the stanza default, and you can have multiple stanzas in this file. So if you're working in multiple tenancies, then you can specify the stanza that you want to associate with. I personally think that's dangerous, especially at Kent, where we're a developer. We're touching a lot of tenancies, and the one thing we don't want to have is a situation where we're performing operations and it's the wrong darn tenant. That's a quick way to have to brush off your resume, and I just don't want to go there. So the practice that I follow is I'll copy that config.client name, and then I will just overwrite config with the appropriate config file. Now, mind you, this is not to suggest that I'm going to be making changes with code I'm developing in a production tenant. That is the quickest way to the unemployment line for a developer. When I'm testing in a sandbox in the David Kent Cloud Lab. And that's the only place that I'm going to be testing code. And then when that code gets pushed to the client, then we have the guardrails in place, and the client has the guardrails in place to make sure that when we push that code, it's ready, and it's going to result in that change having its affected purpose, or meaning achieving its affected purpose. So you can see we've got the user ID here, and I'm going to show you how to get to all this. This fingerprint is derived from here, and this fingerprint is created in OCI. And you'll get to see what that looks like. Here is the PEM key that's being referenced. This is the tenancy OCID. And this is the home region, and the region here should match the home region that your cloud administrator defined when your cloud was set up. This is not required, but it's recommended. Why? Because you should know how to write code so that you can, on the fly, change regions when you're performing operations on cloud resources. So here is our cloud lab. And you got two places of concern for this. First is the tenancy. And in the tenancy, you've got the OCID. I'll click on copy and then do what I need to with it. And so that's how you get the OCID for the tenant. The user, go to user settings. and you should be going to your user account. Now, sometimes in the Oracle Cloud, you don't see user, especially with when sometimes when MFA is implemented in a certain way, it just disappears. And the way you work around that is you go here on the hamburger bar menu, and you click here on identity, and you go straight to users. And now you'll see all the users, and you'll be able to get to your user and get to your OCID. But if it's working fine, and usually it does, you get right here and you can click on API keys, and you can see I've got no API keys. So I'm going to click on add. And there are a number of ways to do this. You can create one. You can use a public key file, which is basically that key is going to come from a key store inside of the tenancy. And so we're going to paste in a key. There's my public key. Now, the first time I do this, I will not know what the fingerprint is. So I know that in the stanza, it's user, fingerprint, key file, tenancy, and region. So typically fingerprint here would be empty, and I would plug that in, and tenancy would be empty, and I would plug that in, and I get the tenancy again by clicking on tenancy here and copying the OCID from there. And then I test it using the CLI to make sure that I can actually see resources, that they return successfully. And you can see, I can see all the parent compartments underneath the root compartment from here, along with the root compartment. Now pip, if I want to upgrade pip, it's typically pip install upgrade pip. Now this is very important. User. I only want to run that for me. I don't want to run it for all of the users on my computer. And this would also be true if I am deploying the SDK and the CLI to a VM running in the cloud or running on-prem that's going to do something to one or more Oracle tenancies. I don't want to globally update the system, because if something breaks, then it's going to be headaches for me later. Now, I'm not going to run that. The Python install is specific to the Python distribution for your operating system, whether that's Windows, Mac, or Linux. And then to install OCI, it's pip install OCI. Now, this is very smart here. You want to pin to the version you're running at. And again, just like doing an upgrade to pip, you want to install the OCI version that you for the user that you are on the operating system. Now, a note here, if you're upgrading the code, you're going to deinstall the SDK, you're going to deinstall the OCI CLI, and then you're going to install the OCI CLI over again to get the latest version, and then you're going to install the SDK. And before you do any of that, you're going to make sure that you're running the latest version of pip. Let's go through the bookmarks. So this is a useful place to go. There we go. So here you can get your Oracle Cloud training and work towards your certification. And so far it's free. It's still free. This link, which has been provided to you, is for the command line interface. And you have to scroll down and you'll see the reference right here. One of the tough parts of developing is figuring out how am I supposed to create the resource? And okay, now I know how. All right, what modules are they in? And are similar to the names of the modules in the SDK. So if it's a block volume service, then it's going to be the block volume service in the SDK. Now, I'll tell you that you can do more in the SDK than you can in the wrappers. In some cases, the wrappers will do everything that the SDK does. In some cases, the wrappers don't. And I'm talking about the CLI, in which case you have to resort to the console, or you have to go to an Ansible or Terraform language to do it, or you write the Python code to do it. But most of the times, like if I want to list all of my boot volumes, I can just go here. And this is a convenient tool to use to get an idea of how the API is going to work. Why? Well, what is this wrapper doing? The wrapper is going to instigate the classes, the methods, the functions and all that. It's going to instigate a copy of the token. That's the config file we were looking at here earlier. And then it's going to prepare a package that it's going to send to the REST API service in the form of a put. So it will do a put, and then it will wait for a push from the REST service, which will be the output. So earlier when I ran OCI IAM compartment list, it did all that. And this is what gets returned. Now, when you're practicing for the first time, you use the CLI tools and understand how they work, and then transition to writing the Python code. It'll make your life a lot easier. The API reference. Here you can see all the services. And there's a module for each of these services. You have installation instructions. Here it tells you how to create a simple program. Not very useful, but it gives you an idea of what's going on. And here you see you can report issues directly to Git. Again, I prefer Oracle support. And of course, you see the link to Oracle support is right here. Stack Overflow, I don't know. I get more helpful API support out of Stack Overflow for Azure and AWS than I do for OCI. There's just not a lot of OCI stuff out there. Here's the magic. Let's take a look at the identity module. And this is what they call the identity client. What is it? It's a bunch of classes and decorators. And remember, a class holds data objects and methods. And methods are functions that are built within a class. So you can see we've got all this stuff here, and there's some similarities to pay attention to. And those are add, create, delete, get, list, update. Let's go through that again. Add, create, delete, get, list, update. You got some things that don't follow that convention, but generally speaking, that's what you got. And the coding standards in Oracle for the SDKs are really good. So if I want to know how to list all the compartments, I simply click here. And now here is the API reference. Explains to you how to get the root OCID or the tenancy OCID, which is just the root compartment. That's all it is. So you pass to it the parameters required or optional. So in this case, compartment ID is required. You can see that here. You have a pagination option if you're concerned about handling memory. I usually am not. And then you have other options here that you can use, like sort order, lifecycle state, retry strategy. That's something to not forget. As we know, internet communications, sometimes packet communications fail. And with when you're writing Python code, it's on you to decide how you're going to handle a communication failure. But then I discovered retry strategy, which basically you can put in a number of retries and the API will just retry for you, which is kind of convenient. Now here's the really magical part. Now, documentation, by the way, was pretty descriptive. But what's really magical is looking at the code. And you have a real working piece of code here that you can take, you can copy it, you paste it into your IDE or into your Jupyter-Lab session, and you can then go in and figure out what this is doing. And then as you learn how to do that, you can start thinking about how can I write code to solve these business problems I'm faced with. So here you see we're instantiating the token, we're instantiating the class for the identity client. We're just making a copy of it in this case to an object called identity underscore client. And then we're setting the output of this code that we're calling will write to this object here, which is calling identity client, and it's calling the method list compartments. And then we're opening up a parameter and we're going to pass some arguments to it. I'm going to pass the compartment ID. And if we want pagination, we're going to give it the pagination value and a limiter. We're going to, in this case, define the, I rarely do all of this. If you want to see the children, then you can set subtree equals to true. This is one of the few SDKs where you can actually use a name to get something instead of the OCID, which is like, why don't they do that everywhere? Well, I don't know, go figure. And then sort by, you can sort by the number of options that are defined here. So if you go back here, sort order, and then you got two options, ASC or DSC. And what you do in that case is you just put in quotes, ASC or DSC. And here you see they're using DSC, which is descending. And then lifecycle state. In this case, I only want to see it if it's in a creating lifecycle state. And then here you see in this example code, we're just simply printing the object list compartment response, which is a method class that gets returned by the list compartments method class, and we're calling the method data. So you've got other modules, and we're not going to go through them now because we're just getting into it now. Here is the community. I think I've used this 3 times in 2.5 years. So it doesn't excite me, but it's there. And so you've seen it. It's in your doc pack with your links. And here's the actual GitHub repo. And so if I want to go to the code, I go right here. And then if I want to drop down to the identity modules here. And then here's the actual client here. And now you can actually read the classes. And the same documentation that you have on the website is right here in the within the class. And that's really cool because that means when you're doing this in your IDE, you can get all that help from your IDE. And it's really nice that they do that. And then here you can see all of the methods and classes and methods that are defined here. Sometimes I will go to models if I need to know how to do something and the documentation is not clear to me, and I need to hit myself with a hammer by reading the code. And then, well, here it is. You can waste your time with the examples if you want to. The frequency of them getting updated varies. As you can see, they're pretty far behind versus where the code is at in many cases. Okay, so a couple of other places to go. So of course we all know about the W3 schools. And if I need Python reference there, I want to look at a built-in function here, and I want to look at print. So I can just go down here to print, and I can see how to call that built-in function. We've all been there. Kubernetes reference is good to have, but certainly not necessary for writing the code. And then there was one more thing I wanted to show you. This is a classic for anyone who's hired programmers. As we get ready to go into the code, are there any questions about the API reference page here? Because you're going to need this. Don't worry if you're feeling lost. I'm here to help you find your way with this. Okay, let's go to the code.